Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. So today I am here to talk about the books that I read in the first half of February. I am filming this on the 14th because tomorrow, Monday the 15th, I start work. I'm starting a new job, which is very, very exciting, but I feel like maybe I should kind of clear away all of the books that I read in the first half of the month, you know, BE, before employment, and then the second half can be everything that I read after I started work, which will be really fun. She says. It's been an interesting bunch of books that I've read in this first half of February. Of course, we've got Wilsathon, which is currently ongoing, where me and a bunch of lovely co-hosts are reading as many Jacqueline Wilson books as we can. And also because I know that I might be moving imminently, I've been trying to really work through my TBR, just so that I'm not moving down with a bunch of unread books whenever that event occurs. But just to start off with the book that I'm not going to talk too much about, we've got The Lottie Project by Jacqueline Wilson. Of course, I am reading this as part of Wilsathon, and I do have a full review dedicated to this, which I will link down below. This was my favourite Jacqueline Wilson book when I was a child, and I'm pleased to say that it has pretty much held up. It made me feel very nostalgic and cozy, and there were definitely some things about this that I could appreciate a lot more as an adult, so that's always a good sign. Another book that I've read in the first half of February is The Switch by Beth O'Leary. I'd previously read The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary, so I was very, very keen to read this follow-up. It's not really a follow-up, it's just another book written by her. What am I talking about? This follows a grandmother-granddaughter pair, Eileen and Lena. Eileen lives in a small little community in Yorkshire. Meanwhile, Lena is like a big, high-power businesswoman in London. However, after an unfortunate stress-related incident at work, Lena is put on a 2-month vacation period. Meanwhile, Eileen is feeling pretty down because she has just gotten out of a bad marriage. Both of these women are feeling really stuck in a rut, and so they decide to switch lives. For 2 months, Eileen will move down to London and kind of check out the senior dating pool in London, and Lena will come up to Yorkshire and try and recharge her batteries and also rekindle her relationship with her mother, which had been really strained since her younger sister had died. And of course, as you might expect, different romances blossom within this book. And yeah, I did generally enjoy this. I thought it was really cute. I always feel like Beth O'Leary's concepts for her books are always really strong, and that's always what brings me to them. Though what I will say is that even though Beth O'Leary's concepts and her, particularly the beginnings of her books, are always really strong, I always feel like there's a little bit of a lag between the middle and the end. And I think part of that is because this book is trying to cover a lot of things in not very many pages. So you've got things like generational differences and the North-South divide that's obviously being covered. You know, you would get that just from reading the back of the book. But then we've also got cheating, domestic abuse, mental health, bereavement, gaslighting, working in business, self-care, older age romance and community. And it doesn't feel like all of these different topics have enough room to breathe. She's spinning a lot of very topical plates here. And one thing that I really didn't like about this book is that it uses the disposable boyfriend trope. Something that is very common in a lot of rom-coms, especially romantic comedy movies, is that at the very beginning, usually either the main girl or the main guy will have a boyfriend at the beginning, and he's just there to get in the way. He doesn't really have a personality. He is just an obstacle to the main romance that we are meant to be shipping. And he's here, and he is basically the cliche of like the overly involved in business cheating boyfriend. And I thought that was such a shame. I thought that we were maybe going to get a bit more of a complex character. Even if he was a disposable boyfriend, I thought there might be a little bit more to him. But no, he just becomes a stereotype really, really quickly. And I'm just a little bit tired of that kind of thing. But like I say, it is just fun. It was a really, really quick read. Very, very readable writing style. So if you are in the mood for this kind of book, definitely give it a go. Next up, I decided to get a little bit of a handle on some of the books that Kieran over at KD Books sent me. I will link the video down below where I mentioned the books that he sent me. I've not done all 4, I've just done 3 of them at the moment, but they were interesting. Definitely not my typical reads. I think the one that I probably liked the most so far was Master of Petersburg by J.M. Coetzee. Have I got it right, Kieran? This is historical fiction. We are following a fictional version of Fyodor Dostoevsky. It's set in 1869, and Dostoevsky has been called to St. Petersburg after the death of his son. He's come over to kind of get his son's affairs in order, get all of his papers, which unfortunately he's having a hard time getting a hold of, and he's really trying to process his grief. Meanwhile, there's also some like revolution, rebellion, things up in the air. There's a little bit of a mystery behind whether or not his son died of suicide or whether it was murder. I think what I found the strongest in this is the depiction of grief. There's some really beautiful passages in here about Dostoevsky's grief. And it's an interesting one because if you actually look up about Dostoevsky, he didn't lose his son. This is a completely fictional scenario, though as Kieran noted in his review, it may have actually been inspired by the author's own life because he did lose a son back in the 80s. This may have been a way for him to process his own grief through the figure of Dostoevsky. Since the news of his son's death, something has been ebbing out of him that he thinks of as firmness. I am the one who is dead, he thinks, or rather, I died, but my death failed to arrive. His sense of his own body is that it is strong, sturdy, that it will not yield of its own accord. His chest is like a barrel with sound staves. His heart will go on beating for a long time. Nevertheless, he has been tugged out of human time. The stream that carries him still moves forward, still has direction, even purpose. But that purpose is no longer life. He is being carried by dead water, a dead stream. And I'm always really curious about how different authors kind of depict grief, and the grief that you get from this fictional Dostoevsky is definitely a much more violent grief, a much more anger-filled grief than I'm used to reading. There are often moments in this book where he just wants to lash out at other people going about their day-to-day life. And then in other chapters, we bounce to a feeling of numbness. We're kind of vacillating between these two emotions of anger and numbness, and it feels really real and really raw. However, there is something that did kind of rub me up the wrong way with this book and the depiction of Dostoevsky's grief, and I'm just going to put a content warning out here now for people who don't want to hear about sexual assault within a book. I'll have a timestamp for when I stop talking about this, because there's a scene in this book in which our fictional Dostoevsky does rape a woman. It starts off as being a consensual coupling, however he wakes up and decides that he's not done and basically forces himself on her. And this isn't brought up again, and I don't think it was really given the weight and the significance that it deserves. He's also like really baffled by the fact that this woman acts very coldly towards him the next morning, and I'm like, what? And then it's kind of written off as this is just another way of his grief manifesting, that we should kind of sweep it under the rug because, you know, he's grieving. And I'm like, no, you don't get that as an out. And then it's never brought up again, and then they go back to like a romantic relationship, and I'm like, what? I don't know, anybody else who's read this, did you have that feeling with this book? It just felt like you could have taken that scene out and nothing would have changed and it would have been a lot better. We then have Bad Ideas Chemicals by Lloyd Markham. This is a weird book and I'm not quite sure about my thoughts on it. This is all about a fictional Welsh town called Gorgry who are suffering from an infestation of roaches. I don't know. And it's all about these citizens and how they're dealing with this and the poverty and the fact that, you know, they're not being looked after, kind of set around this one night out and all these strange, quirky, eccentric characters that we do meet. And I think this is just one of those ones where I'm just gonna have to put my hands up and say, I don't get it. There were definitely moments of this where like I found it funny. There were definitely some witty passages in here, but I just don't think this is 100% my thing. Though there was definitely a line right at the beginning of the book that makes me think that this author has definitely watched Spike Lee's The 25th Hour movie. I think the most famous scene in that movie is one where Edward Norton's character basically goes on a massive rant tirade about New York. And he basically ends this rant about New York by being like, let the ocean wash over it, let an earthquake crumble it to the ground. And then right at the beginning of this book, one of the characters opens his curtains and says, rain, perfect, he thinks. Let it rain. May it never cease. Tip the entire ocean upon us and let the whole of Gorgry sink into the sea like the stubborn, soggy log of shit that it is. And I was just like, you have definitely watched 25th Hour from that line. And then the final one of Kieran's books that he sent me, just really setting the final nail in the coffin that I do not do weird books. Hotel World by Ali Smith. I don't get it, but thankfully neither did Kieran. I think he knew that I wasn't gonna like this. I don't get it. So this is like typical Ali Smith. It's in her stream of consciousness style. We start off with one of the maids at this servant who has like killed herself. She's like gone down the dumb waiter and is going woohoo, and Kieran had a whole thing about the logistics of saying woohoo rather than we, and I definitely recommend you watch that video. And yeah, it just doesn't get any less weird. I think the issue that I have with stream of consciousness, especially the way that Ali Smith does it, is I don't see the point. I don't get it. It's just confusing. I don't like it. Like, I don't even know what to say about this. It's just literally, this is a book that exists. I don't get it. I don't know what it was trying to do. But it is pink, so that's nice. However, going from the worst book I read finally to the best book that I read, the best book that I've read so far this year, which is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This is a book that I thought that I would like after seeing Anna from Read to Me at Midnight and Jennifer Brooks talking about it and saying how much they loved it, but I was still really surprised at how much I enjoyed this. So we initially meet Adeline LaRue in 1714 in France. She is running away from her parents because she doesn't want to be married off. She wants freedom, she wants adventure. She doesn't want to have to be accountable to anybody and to never get to leave her hometown. She doesn't want that life for herself, so she sits on the ground and she prays to the gods and they don't answer her. However, eventually one of them does, but unfortunately Addie has not checked what time it is. She hasn't checked the sky, the sun has set, and the god that answers her is one of the gods that answer after the dark, which are the gods that you don't want to mess with. You don't want to be making deals with them. And this god offers Addie everything that she wants. He offers her her freedom, her chance to not be accountable to anybody. He doesn't want to make her immortal, but kind of they work out a deal that as soon as Addie is kind of done with her life, she will give her soul to him. So this god is like, okay, job's a good one. I will give you eternal life until you no longer want it. They strike a deal, but then Addie quickly realizes that the price of this deal is that people do not remember her. She can talk to people, she can spend the entire day with people, but as soon as like the door closes on her, as soon as they fall asleep, they won't remember her, which means that her family no longer remember her. She doesn't have any ties to anywhere. She cannot get a job. She can't have a home. She can't even like stay the night somewhere because people will forget her and then just promptly kick her out. So we're basically following Addie through the 300 years of her trying to live like this. Also trying to wiggle and work out the little holes within the deal that she has made with this devil, who she eventually comes to call Luke. And what I really love about this is that from time to time we do get more of a glimpse of Luke. We get to see more of his personality and her relationship to him, because he is the only constant in her life. He is the only person who remembers her. And like I say, we follow her through 300 years until finally in 2014 she comes across a boy in New York who seems to remember her. And ooh, how the plot thickens as we get really intrigued as to why it is that this boy knows who she is and can remember her. And I just thought this was so good. I feel like it's been a really, really long time since like I would read a book and then I'd put it down and I would still be thinking about the characters afterwards. It's a book that is about loneliness and longing and love. I kind of want to say that it's quite a sexy, sensual book, but I feel like that gives the wrong impression. What I would say instead is that it's a very charged book. The characters all have such chemistry and really bounce off each other, especially Addie and Luke, the devil, and then Addie and Henry, who is the guy who meets her, who remembers her. And that's really fun to read. I feel like the bit that had been really sold to me about this book was the fact that one of the loopholes that Addie finds in being able to be remembered is that she will leave her impression on artists, musicians. They will maybe start to compose something. She will give a musician like an idea of a melody, write down the composition, and even though they forget her after the fact, they still have the melody somewhere. An artist might start to draw a picture of Addie, and as soon as like he goes to the bathroom he forgets her, but the painting is still there. And so that is how Addie is able to leave her mark, by being a muse to these artists. And I feel like that was the bit that had been really sold to me, was the way that she interacts with these historic people and these historic places. But actually I would say that the art and history side of this book is really understated. This book isn't here to talk about art and history, it's there to talk about how she's able to leave that impression on the world, and how even though Addie cannot physically leave an impression on the world, she can't write anything, she can't draw anything, she is able to inspire other people. And I really liked it. I have done a video, I don't know if it's gone up already or if it's going to be one of the next ones that goes up, which is all about how this fits into other books that are like deals with death, or books that are to do with immortality and going through history, going through the centuries, living through multiple generations. And I would actually say that this is maybe my favourite of those kind of books that I've read recently. I really do highly recommend it. I know this has been a bit of a Marmite book for some people, particularly for people who have read V. Schwab's other books and were expecting something else from it. Personally, as somebody who's never read V. Schwab before, like I don't know if this would tempt me to read anything else that she's done, because it does seem quite different to her normal, fantasy that she does. But as a standalone, I think it's absolutely fantastic and definitely recommend. So those are all of the books that I've read so far in February. I am also currently halfway through Love Frankie by Jacqueline Wilson, and it's really, really interesting to get a taste of Jacqueline Wilson's newer books. It definitely still feels like I'm coming back home, coming back to Jacqueline Wilson's old writing. It doesn't feel like there's been a massive divergence and change in how she writes. And I'm quite enjoying this. I will let you know more details in my February part 2 wrap up. And yeah, at the moment it's basically me trying to work through as many of my TBR books as possible, because if I do end up moving, I don't want to be moving down with masses and masses of unread books when I could have just read them now. Anyway, do let me know what you have read so far in February. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I have. What did you think of them? I'd love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic, fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.